This is our April 12th DEI Town Hall. My name is Mike Fife. I am the DEI coach at Williston Central School and Allenbrook. And my hope tonight is just to have a conversation around restorative practices. Part of that will be a community conversation. It feels like we do have a lot of experts in the room, which is great. And then I just had some questions that I was hoping to ask a few guests that I've invited, and Leslie, who works over at Spectrum, Evan, who works for the district, and who is here from Up for Learning? Emily is here from Up for Learning. And they can talk a little about what they do at some point. But first, I was hoping we could just, in a nice restorative way, do a tiny bit of community building, which is going to be hard to do in an online meeting. But I was hoping we could all introduce ourselves with names, pronouns, just a little something about you, what your role is if you're in the district, or what brought you here tonight potentially. And then I'm hoping to do a couple rounds. As we can't do a real, normally I'd sit us in a circle and we could go around and say things, but that's a little more difficult. Are people okay? And I don't know how we're going to get assent, but are people okay with me just kind of going through the folks who are here? And I have an order here on my participant list, and I can just introduce folks and they can speak. I'm getting a thumbs up there. And Bonnie, should I be calling on you as well, or are you simply hosting tonight?
I would prefer to stay in the background, but I do learn a lot by attending all of these. Thank you. Lovely.
And as for any restorative process or kind of any process that I like to run, feel free to pass. If there's anything you're not comfortable answering, don't. And hopefully we can learn from each other a little. So I'll start. My name's Mike Fife. I use he, him pronouns. And my role in the school is a DEI coach. And I have Larry up next.
Okay, I'm an interloper from outside the district. I'm a psychologist and consultant. And I met you, Mike, when we did the coaches training in August. And I've been working with ASMA, Dr. Abunayev, to provide some training for principals and directors and counselors in the district. We had a good session on Monday, and we'll have another one next month on leadership. So I'm here to observe and
wonderful.
Absorb, learn.
Thank you. Asma, I have you next on my list here.
Hi, Asma Abunayev, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director at the school district. So I work with Mike.
And then I have Emily.
Thanks, Mike. My name's Emily Rossier. I use she, her pronouns. I work for Up for Learning. Out of Montpelier, we support youth and adults to reimagine and transform education together. And we're working at Williston Central School this year with a youth adult team. And that's how I got to know Mike, because he's a member of that team as well. So Mike invited me to be here to be another restorative practitioner to help with the conversation. And in another role, I am the parent of a 9th grader at CVU.
Thank you. And of course, the order is changing as we go. Evan, I've got you next.
Hi, my name is Evan Sivo. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Behavior Systems at CVSD. Mike graciously invited me, and Mike has been really helpful this year in helping us write an Act 112 grant directly related to restorative practices and trauma-informed work that we're actually bringing to the district, and we actually got the grant. So it's exciting to be a part of this. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. And I think LaShawn's up next.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is LaShawn Parcells, and I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the DEI coach for Shelburne Community School. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Youth Development Program at Spectrum Youth and Family Services in Burlington. Mike and I used to be colleagues, and he was actually my boss once, and I learned a lot from him. So I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Leslie. And Patricia, do you go by Patricia or Pat?
Patricia, please. Thanks.
Patricia, sorry.
Used to be Pat, but it was too small.
Patricia.
So we're learning a lot about you, Mike, tonight.
I did not expect that. Yeah.
Patricia Fontaine, she, her pronouns. I'm a member of Surge BTV, showing up for racial justice, and also member of the Equity and Diversity Committee in the town of Shelburne, Vermont.
And Renee?
Hello, everyone. My name is Rene Sanchez, and I am the superintendent of CVSD, and I'm very happy to be able to attend our DEI town hall tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it seems like we have a lot of folks here who have done some sort of circle process. It is sometimes nice, and I think it's nice, so we'll be doing this. Just to, learn a little more about each other before we start getting into the weeds and more kind of vulnerable stuff. But I was just hoping folks could share a little something that they're looking forward to this weekend. And I'll start again. I'm very excited. I have a friend of mine who is coming over to help me build a very large garden bed. And I really like berries and making jam. And so if I can get that installed, I can plant a bunch of blueberries. And then in like 10 years, I can have a pint of blueberry jam from my, usually I find low yield blueberry patch. I feel like if I keep my expectations low, I'll be happier about my blueberry output. Larry, do you have something you're looking forward to this weekend?
I just realized I don't have anything in mind that's exciting. Probably doing some cleaning up in the basement. That would please my wife. She would be excited.
Asma, anything for you?
Not much to do in Ramadan, actually. So, yeah, resting.
Emily?
I'm going to a mom prom, which is a fundraiser at the New Haven Elementary School. The parent group puts on that fundraiser, and I'm going for the first time, and I'm looking forward to doing that with my cousin and some friends.
Evan?
My daughter's softball season starts this Saturday, and I'm not coaching, so I get to just watch and enjoy it, which is great. And then I'm going out to a party with my friends later on, and they're all coming up, so it's good to reconnect.
Wonderful. LaShawn?
Organizing and cleaning.
Leslie?
This weekend, my 5-year-old is having his very first play date where we just like drop him off at someone's house and don't stay there the whole time, which is a huge milestone. But I'm excited to use that couple of hours to just kind of get some spring cleaning done and take some time to decompress. So bittersweet, but exciting.
Patricia?
So 2 big plans. One is going to a really cool exhibit at the Middlebury Museum of Art that's street scenes from Lagos and Johannesburg, exhibited photographs. And when I'm not doing that, I will be bird watching. Things are really coming in, and it's just one of the most exciting times of the year if you're a bird nerd like me.
And Renee?
My daughter has her first JV softball game of the year for CVU, so I am very much looking forward to that.
Thanks. And I think for me, I'm going to try to be having kind of a restorative. This is going to be a very meta meeting where we're trying to use a restorative circle to talk about restorative circles. So I'm going to come in and out of being present in it and not being present in it. And I'm going to cheat here. Patricia, I'm going to use myself as an example. It's really hard to not be reactive in circles and not respond to people, but that's one of the things that you try to do in a circle process. And as I say that, it's really hard for me not to say that I already saw a couple of herons and a couple of egrets, and I'm very excited. So I'm using my position to both cheat and talk about how the process works. And not model that well, but it is very exciting. So I'm hoping, and this time I'm hoping not to start. So if anybody is up for volunteering to start, I don't know how they can signal me because I can't see all your photos. And this is where you can pass if you'd like. But I'm just hoping folks can say a little about like how they might define restorative practices or what restorative practices kind of means to them. And we can kind of jump right in there. Do I have any brave souls that are willing to jump in on that question of what restorative practices mean to them?
I'm happy to jump in.
Oh, thank you.
And can I ask a question before if at some point it would be great to understand why that particular practice that you just demonstrated, both sides of it, how that would help frame restorative practice. And maybe you're going to do that later down the road.
Why to be non-responsive?
Right.
Yes. I could just field that. I think it's important to do because you don't want folks to feel like some folks are being encouraged and some folks are being discouraged. And I just did bad practice by encouraging and saying, oh, Patricia and me are connected with bird watching. But I felt like it was a pretty safe way to use that. And so by being non-reactive, you can stay in kind of a listening space and just listen. And it allows everybody to be able to share a little more safely. I also think that there are some downsides to that, right? If somebody says something that's really harmful, sometimes circles can be dangerous because of that rule as well. And so that's why for me, and so let's talk a little about what restorative practices mean to each of us, and maybe that answer will come out a little more clearly without just my opinion.
Great, thank you so much.
But thank you for the wonderful question.
I thought I understood it, and because I'm also part of some meditative communities, and that's often a practice there. And then in racial and social justice, there's like the brave space, safe space conversation. So I think we're all gonna get all with that. I really like the word restore and restorative. And for me, what it means for my really basic understanding is it's really about restoring relationship, which often gets really shifted around on the power dynamic in a school system. So that's what I'll offer for now.
Thanks. And pretending like we were in a circle, I'm going to continue on our circle, which puts Renee next.
So the question is about what do we perceive, what do we feel about restorative practices?
Yeah, what do they mean to you? How might you define them?
So what I have, because I'm still, I would say that I'm still a novice because I've seen it rolled out so many different ways. So I guess for me, it's really important that as we expand their use within our district, that we really have a good idea of what we're expecting to achieve when we implement them. And if that's the case, then again, it's going to be, are we doing them, somewhat consistently across the board? because at the end of the day, as we implement them, we are going to be closer to achieving an outcome where in the past, maybe there was going to be some things left unanswered, things left unsaid. And so people walk away from incidences and other things where they're not able to really have the closure that they need. And so I think that would get us, if we're able to do that on a more regular basis, we'll be able to go a lot farther as a team.
Sorry, I need to see who's Asma. You are at the top of my list again.
I will pass and give the time for our guests. So if you can choose another person.
Sure. And I want to be clear, I'm going to give some extra time to those guests after a couple rounds of the circle. But Emily.
Thanks, Mike. I think of restorative practices as like the science of relationships and community. So not only the repairing relationships when harm has occurred, but also creating relationships in the first place.
And I've got Evan up next.
Not to piggyback off of Emily, but I would agree that I think at the crux of it all, it's about relationships and building a safe community where people can talk to each other, share ideas, and it allows for equity across the board where everybody's voice is heard. I think the harm circles are one thing that we get stuck on at times, and that's more of that restorative justice where it came from. I think restorative practices is this entire system changing to address community, to address relationships, and when it's necessary, address harm.
LaShawn? LaShawn, are you there?
Sorry, I am. I had
Oh,
pressed
that's
the wrong
okay.
button. When I think of restorative practices, I look at it as it's a tool to help repair, to build relationships, and to realize the connections that we do have with each other.
And sorry, my list is it's bouncing around. Leslie?
I love how much relationships are coming up because that's what it really boils down to for me as well. And what I also think about a lot is a shift from a punitive model to a model that focuses on repair work and strengthening those relationships in a manner that is equitable for the folks involved.
And I'm gonna, again, do a kind of non-circle-ish process. My background is mediation. And so one of the things that's really hard for me in circles is that there's no reflecting. And I think that can be really difficult as well, because as you're building community, I sometimes find it really hard in a circle to not feel heard. So you've all just shared something which may or may not have been vulnerable for you. And what can be really nice from just a human relationship building sense is for somebody to like repeat back what they heard you say. And so rather than share my own thing, I took some notes and I'm going to repeat back all the pieces that we've just shared to kind of read back to you our shared definition of restorative practices that we kind of created or what it means to us. And I've got a science of relationships and community. It's a way to provide closure. It's a way to build relationships and safe community. Sometimes it can end up focused on repairing harm, but it's really a system and a series of practices. And then a lot of feelings about building relationships, realizing connections, and shifting from a punitive model to an interconnected and strengths kind of based model. Have I missed anything that somebody shared? I heard something. I don't know if that was and I think I'm going to use this kind of as I come in and out of our process. Just for me, I think what can be really neat is we do have a lot of folks who have studied and worked in restorative practices, but even if you don't, I think what's neat about restorative practices is you can get some neat definitions out of just the communal knowledge. And it can also, for me, be a way of learning by kind of pooling everybody's knowledge. And there are some advantages and disadvantages of that, but it's a different learning model. And so I really like restorative practices for that as well. So rather than have somebody like me lecturing, or anybody else lecturing, you can just create this definition together, which I think is a neat use as well. I think I'm going to skip a few questions. Is there anything? No, I'm going to skip that one too. Does anybody have an experience with, and maybe we can kind of leave the circle process for a little. Oh, hello, Wayne and Lindsay. There's lots of people coming. So actually, given where we are and that there's some new people, I'm thinking maybe we can move to the kind of more panelish discussion, which might be a little more focused on Leslie and Katie and Evan. And I'm hoping I can ask them a few questions and they can respond. And I'm also hoping that if anybody in the audience has stuff to add or things that they want to say, I think there's a hand raising option in Zoom. Is that right? Sorry, it's been a minute for Zoom for me.
Under reactions, you can click raise hand at the bottom of your screen.
For anybody here, if you'd like to add something as I ask these questions, I'm hoping this can be a community conversation. I've also brought in some folks who I think have some really varied approaches to restorative work. So I'm hoping this will get some varied answers, but maybe it won't. We'll see. So I think my first question for Evan and Leslie and Katie, but also everybody else, is can you just talk a little bit about your experiences with restorative practices and kind of how they help you in your work or any field that you've worked in? And I apologize, I know I didn't put that on the list of questions I might ask you, but I feel like it's a nice place to start. Do any of the three of you want to start with that?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So I first had my first experience with restorative practices with John Kidda. He's a trainer through the Best Institute at UVM. And he came to Heinsberg when I was a special educator first year, and I just was enthralled with it. I couldn't stop listening. I wanted to instantly go in a classroom and start using it. And I just felt that there was just so much potential there. As I'm a BCBA, I love working with students with significant social, emotional, behavioral challenges. And I just saw this opportunity to bring those students back into the fold instead of going down that punitive route and allowing kids to come into the circle and share their experiences and kind of normalize some of that. So from that training, I actually was in the middle of my master's program and wrote my capstone at St. Mike's on social emotional learning using restorative practice, restorative circles and practices as my avenue of teaching those skills. And so I got to do a study of my 6th grade class at that point at Heinsberg Community School, and just saw how powerful it was in those moments of watching kids that were so, again, love middle school, awkward, uncomfortable in their own skin, and taking this not seriously in the beginning, making jokes, cracking wisecracks, embarrassing kids that were sharing. And as the circle got tighter and the community got built around it, there was real things shared in those moments that were just, first off, shocking to teachers. And that's one of those challenges that comes up with restorative practices. As you build that safe place, kids are going to share experiences. And one of those standout moments was just like when a kid brought up their gender identity in that circle. And it was powerful, but it was shocking at that moment because nobody expected that to come out in that community circle there. And teachers were uncomfortable with it and they didn't know what to do. And I said, sometimes you don't have to do anything because the community has been built and kids heard it. And hopefully we can revisit it if something did come up. But that was it. It just needed to be heard. And that kid needed to feel safe to say it. And they did in front of their peers without being prompted. Just the availability of feeling safe in that moment, something that was shared.
Thanks. And Katie, are you up for sharing a little? And I know that I will be transparent that you all do a lot of youth adult partnership work and often would bring students to events like this. And I think part of the reason I like having an all adult event is that we can kind of use our collective knowledge to see how we can create some systems. That's my hope here, and do that without kind of depending on that feedback that Evan's getting at that might come up in the circles. You know, and just kind of building our own capacity to reflect on our own systems as those in power without relying too much, not that that's what happens in your work, on that feedback from lower power folks in a system. So with that being said, Katie, maybe you can talk about the wonderful work that UP does in kind of, well, I won't frame it in how I see it, but I see it as balancing that power dynamic a little.
Yeah. It's funny when you first asked the question, I think my first real training with restorative practices was I started at U32 down outside of, well, before that I was working in alternative education places for quite a while. So I think many of the systems I've been a part of on the outskirts of schools have been restorative for a long time. But I got officially trained with the IIRP model through U32 when I started as a teacher there. And that's one model that they have used for quite a while. And so every staff member is trained in that first level of restorative practices training at that school. So that was the first school system that I entered that was really prioritizing restorative practices at the root of at least the staff side of things, and done through the discipline processes as well. They didn't have peer mediation yet, but I bet they probably do now. I haven't been there for about over a year, so I think they were moving in that direction. And I think it helped me in my work there a lot. I kind of had almost like a tier 2 restorative drop-in space where students could come and take a break from class, an approved break from class, to get a different type of support. So they could take a break, they could come to get academic work done in kind of that setting, one-on-one with me or with small groups with me. So I really felt like it created a nice restorative tier 2 support for the entire school, because it could be accessed by any students at all, any time of the day. And it was really, over time, supported and beloved by staff. Staff would come to students, kind of became a community space. So that's kind of my background in restorative practices. Now, Emily and I and Lindsay work it Up for Learning, and we do youth adult partnership. And I think restorative practices is at the root of all projects. With your district right now, we're focusing on restorative practices and equity, but really at the foundation of youth partnership, youth adult partnership, is that like shared equity and shared voice. And I think circle processes and restorative practices and the procedures that are so beloved in that practice really are at the root of how youth and adults work together in the spaces that we try to cultivate. So the foundations of relationship building, as you all said in your shared definition, and building a culture together really are at the root of the work we're doing now too. So that's how RP has supported me through my process up to this point. I think I answered the question. Not sure who I'm passing it to.
Maybe Emily?
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Mike. like Evan, I received training from John Kidda, as well as Annie O'Shaughnessy as a teacher at Virgins. So that's where my restorative experience and practice began. And like Katie, in alternative education programs, sometimes together. And at Up for Learning, like as youth and adults are working together to reimagine and transform education, with that shared power, like one of the ways that I'm seeing that connection in circles, like whoever has the talking piece has, like they're facilitating in that moment, right? So it's just like a small example of sharing power in a circle. And like Katie said, we have a lot of different programs. The one I work in focuses on restorative practice. And in all of our programs, restorative practices are the way we do it, if that makes sense. Yeah, because it is like when we're talking about schools and making schools good for everyone, relationships and community are essential. I'll pass it back to Mike and maybe Leslie.
I think you can pass it straight to Leslie, but by saying that, you didn't. So.
So my lens is, or my perspective and background is a bit different in that I've never worked at a school, and I don't have any background in that field at all. But I do have a lot of experience in social work. So I came up through Lund, working with women struggling with substance use and working often to reunify with children who've been removed by the state. And from there, I came over to Spectrum, where I'm working with youth who have been affected by the foster care system and having been in state custody at some point in their life. So the age range that I serve is 14 to 23 right now. So a lot of the youth that are working in my program are attending schools either in this district or nearby. And so the more that I have seen how systems have affected the folks that I'm working with, whether it's the judicial system or policies in schools and broader policies everywhere, I've seen how it can affect families and youth that I'm trying to serve. So when I learned more about restorative justice, I've been to several trainings over the years, and we really tried to incorporate a lot of what we learned into the policies that we have at Spectrum. So I can go into more specific examples later, but the youth that I'm working with will say they've all experienced a great deal of trauma. And so the reactions that they have and the harm that they can cause are at times more intense than what you might experience from a youth without that history. Not always, but I think that when considering it through the lens of those populations, restorative practices are just life-changing for the youth that I serve.
And in a mild setup, I think one of the reasons that I really wanted to bring lots of folks who have worked in RP to the group is I think that there's a common misconception that RP is circles. Like restorative practice is circles and circles are restorative practices. And then if we do circles, we've got it. And so I'm wondering, and I'd open this to our panelists especially, but also to anybody in the community who's up for answering this question. But I'm wondering if folks can just share any stories they have from personal experience or non-personal experience without using names or divulging too much. But if folks have experiences that they can share, and Leslie, maybe you could talk about that client. And this is what I mean by it's a little bit of a setup. I have a plant as an example, which, by the way, sometimes happens in restorative circles. It's this modeling of what we're looking for. So yeah, maybe Leslie, you can start with that. And then I'm hoping other folks can share, and they might be stories similar to this. They might be a circle process. Who knows what it is? So feel free to just share whatever your heart feels like sharing.
Thank you. So a couple of years ago, we had a youth. So I'll give it just a little foundation. The program that I work with, the Youth Development Program, can provide funding to youth at times to help them work toward goals that they have. So in this instance, a youth who was working in our program, she was 20, had an extensive just kind of history of lots of different placements and traumas and things. We wrote a check for her to take to the DMV, written out to the DMV to cash for her license renewal or something like that. And a couple of days later, I got a phone call from our finance director, in a panic, right? Because someone had taken our banking account information somehow and was using it all over the internet to buy like thousands of dollars worth of car insurance at Progressive multiple times. So what ended up happening is that we were able to trace it back to this particular youth because she was using her name, when she was doing this at Progressive. And so the messaging from a lot of the folks that I work with was, wow, like we cannot serve this youth anymore. She can't be a part of our programming. There was talk about, do we need to report this to the police, or like, what can we do about this? But the lens was coming from a more punitive stance, just I think based on folks' backgrounds. So instead, we were able to offer her the opportunity to rebuild and repair the trust that we had with her. So that involved like reaching out to her saying like, hey, it seems like this is happening. Can we talk about this? And we ended up sitting down together. She talked about just being desperate for money and being homeless, living in a car and not having the ability to afford anything that she needed. And she had learned about a way to kind of, she was buying car insurance for other people and they were paying her directly and she was kind of getting a commission off of that, right? And so it was really, really interesting to hear her own perspective. You hear just from the outside, oh, someone stole our banking information and it created this huge storm of chaos and we had to close the banking account. But all of that doesn't matter, right? Like Spectrum is an institution with plenty of money and that doesn't affect us at all. And what instead we were able to do was keep this youth in our program, have these conversations with her, and reach a point where it felt like we could continue serving her as always, based on those conversations that we were able to have. So rather than, I think, what a lot of youth expect, which is to just kind of, you burn a bridge and then that's it, it turned into this beautiful thing. And I'm sorry if that sounds corny, but that's the biggest example I have of this. And I think it helped to shape the way that we deal with these situations as they come up. And it's really like what we try to do because everyone deserves another chance. So I'll pass it back to Mike.
Thanks. And that was a lot of story, and I'll acknowledge that. So some people, you may have a smaller story about something with less big stakes, and that's okay too. I also want to be clear, having worked there as well, I'm going to add to this story. We tried to do that with a lot of clients, and sometimes it didn't work. And I think that can be really hard for selling RP to a system, because when it doesn't work and the client does decide to burn that bridge, and we also didn't have a punitive response, then there can be these questions of like, so what did we even do? And it's like, well, we stayed true to our values and we tried to do this thing, and that's okay too, even if it doesn't rebuild and end up in a happy ending. So that's just my little sadder addition to that piece. Any panelists or anybody else who have a story, personal or otherwise, that they're up for sharing?
I want to share a general story about our community justice centers. I see them as huge resources in our state. We've gotten Up for Learning has had the opportunity to partner with them in a lot of the schools that we work with, and they've just brought excellent skills and knowledge and values to the work. Yeah, really good things have happened, like supporting peer mediation, like Katie was talking about, and coming in and helping facilitate repair circles when someone said something racist, and like involve the whole class, like looking at like, okay, who was affected, and how, and what do we need to do to make it right, and who needs to do that. So those sorts of things are really inspiring to me. And both the youth who are asking for it and who are wanting to participate, as well as the school leaders who are reaching out, making space for this and reaching out for help. Yeah.
Can I ask a short follow-up? Can you talk a little about what making space for this means?
Well, I'd say the punitive method is faster, easier. I mean, I put this in quotes because to me it's not, because it creates a lot of things that need to be cleaned up, just causes more harm, in my opinion, often. Although, like you're saying, Mike, restorative is voluntary. So if someone doesn't want to participate or doesn't want to follow up this way, there are other options, right? So yeah, I think building relationships, that takes a ton of time. Repairing harm, that takes a lot of time. And so looking at what are we making time and space for? Space too, like physical space. Where can we have these conversations? Where during the day can this happen? There's some logistical support that's important as well.
Thanks.
Mike, I just wanted to share something too. And when you were talking earlier about like, we just have this misconception that restorative practices are circles, right? Like we need to put these circles in classrooms. We need to build up the community. I like to bring it down just to even interactions with people. And what does that mean when you have a restorative conversation, when you are correcting a behavior, when there is something going on? Do you have to come at it punitive, like stop that, or focus on the negative, when you can just ask the student, hey, what's going on for you today? What do you need from me? Instead of directly attacking, the problem that's right there in front of you. You know it's a problem. You've asked them 100 times to stop it, but without knowing the circumstance of what that child's brought in that day, just having some empathy, taking a deep breath. Again, it's a system-wide change. It doesn't have to start with circles and finding time in those really tight schedules. It's just us saying to ourselves, we're going to address this in a different way personally, right? It starts with the individual making a really conscious choice that like that conversation might take a little longer. You might have to interrupt your class or find time within your class. But again, gives you space to hear about that student's truths, what they've gone through, what their circumstances are, which lead to more trust, instant relationship building. Because if you go the punitive route, then you have to rebuild that relationship and start all over again. Again, I've worked in an alternative placement. I understand that those kids are vulnerable and they are constantly gauging who you are and judging you. And more importantly, everybody in that room is watching you as the teacher, as the instructor, or how you're going to handle that. And then we are modeling that for our students within that group. And so when every little eye is watching you, are you yelling at that kid? And then that's how we deal with kids that are making problems or causing disruptions in our classroom. Or are you showing empathy in that moment and asking the right questions and giving them a chance to have a problem? Because it's okay. That's okay to have a tough day. But I think the more we open up that in our classroom and to find that there is time for that, the other things will fall in line, right? Behavior is going to follow that because kids will see that this is safe. I can have a bad day and somebody's going to care about me. And so again, getting to that circle, awesome, want to get to that place, but we don't need to go there right away. We just need to build this mindset and wrap our heads around just that little conversation. Then when we see that product, the product of that, of kids buying in, behaviors going down, then we can increase it to that next level.
And I see you, Lindsay, and I want to reflect and add a little piece again, which is that I love what you're talking about. And I think sometimes it can be a really hard sell because folks that I've seen, and I'm going to go with my work at Spectrum, can sometimes think, well, like I did it for half of the session with the client, and then I told the client what to do for the second half of the session. And it's like, well, that's not going to do it, right? There's a little bit of all or nothing, right? Because a safe space needs to be safe all the time. And that consistent reaction needs to be that consistent reaction all the time. And, you know, you as an adult, you can make a mistake, but then you're going to need to own that mistake. So it's not like there's no space for making mistakes, but there, as we're all kind of getting at, there's a lot of making space, and it has to be consistent. And so thank you. And I see a hand up from Lindsay.
Thank you. And I apologize. I'm on the road, so I'm in the car and talking through my car. So hopefully you can hear me. I'm also from Up for Learning as well, so one of the Up for Learning partners. And I think Evan basically said what I was thinking, but I just want to like put an exclamation point on what Evan just said. And that was really about the mindset that before, like, you need to, it's a shift in the mindset. It's a paradigm shift. And it really, then you start to look at your school in a totally different way. The school system, are the teaching and learning practices restorative? Are the policies restorative? Are our expectations and our norms restorative? Do we center our collective values as a community? Do we value community engagement? So I think, you know, it's become, unfortunately, that the idea of restorative approaches in schools, sometimes people just will, as has been stated already, go right to the picture of a circle. Circles are fundamental, and it's a really good practice, just like we had to practice lots of things, like practice a new language, practice running. So the circle practice is part of that, because it really gives people, it kind of helps them learn how to share power and have that space where there's equity of voice, where they can deeply listen to one another and build that collective kind of culture. So people go right to the circle, and it's important to practice circles, but I just can't state enough how important it is to look at the whole system from a restorative approach. And it starts with, just like youth adult partnerships, starts with looking at our mindsets around power dynamics in our systems and our school systems, our justice systems, whatever it might be. It's the same with restorative approaches and restorative practices. It's not like a one-off workshop that you can go to and say like one and done. It's something that takes a lot of time. And there's a lot of great school systems in Vermont that have been doing this work for a number of years, and many models and examples to learn from.
Thank you. So we have about 8 minutes left, and now I'm going to go back to the script I shared with the panelists. And I would open this up to anybody else as well. And I think this is a tough question, but maybe it's not. We'll see. Can you just, and for anybody, can you think or talk a little about where you see, knowing what you know about restorative practices, kind of how it can overlap and where it doesn't overlap with diversity, equity, and inclusion work? And I see people doing some thinking and maybe doing some writing.
I'm not practiced in this practice, but I can already see, just in the equity work we're trying to do with the town, how important it is. You know, the expression we keep hearing is everybody needs a seat at the table. Mm. But I don't see it as a rectangular table. I see it as a circular table. And there's something that happens differently in a circle than happens with somebody at the head of a table. It's like simple metaphors like that. Also, practices that engage listening and reflecting as opposed to listening and challenging. And I really appreciate what people are saying in terms of equity of voice, what Lindsay just shared about equity of voice and the importance of community engagement. I think municipalities and school systems in particular can get really insular, especially when there's a lot of emotional charge And so to have a place where that can be held and talked through and listened through feels really important.
Thank you. Any other? I think I saw somebody unmute. Maybe I was wrong.
I would be happy to chime in again,
Sure.
but I am parked now. And I just think there's the intersection that it's restorative approaches and DEI work are woven together when done well and with integrity. Because what you're doing when you are engaged in restorative approaches or practices is you are actually working really hard to reimagine a system that is really only really benefits some people and not all people, through the practices, the slowing down, the intentionality around listening, building empathy, building community, building relationships. Our schools are, they are products of white supremacy culture. And when you think about those kinds of structures and systems around compliance and who has power, who doesn't, and then you think about a paradigm shift around restorative approaches that centers relationships, belonging, connection, joy, justice. It's kind of, to me, it feels like one and the same when it's done well. And restorative practices are not something that are done to and for students or teachers. It's something that becomes the fabric of the school system, and it's done with the community.
And I have some thoughts. So while I'm waiting for other folks' thoughts, I will add a couple as well. I think that, I forget who it was, but somebody was talking, sorry that I can't give you more credit. I think it was one of the UP folks, because you guys do a really wonderful job of this. I think seeing the kids at Williston who are able to share because they have this safe space inside the school, but also kind of separate from the school. I think restorative practices can really get us a lot of information in a safe way, right? By creating that space where folks feel comfortable and have trusted relationships. Hi, Benny. Sorry, speaking of trusted relationships and people who I just adore. I think that those spaces can be great to get information. And so that's where I see the overlap. But I also think that sometimes there is a lack of overlap or in that transition towards, I think, this vision that Lindsay was describing really well. There is also sometimes a space to just say, we're maybe not using as restorative an approach. We're going to just notice that this is a problem in our system and we do have the power to fix it. And so we're going to do that. I think of things like raising a pride flag or raising a Black Lives Matter flag. Like, the folks who have power, like, we don't always need to share that power immediately to just get something done. Maybe we can get the thing done, and by doing so, build trust. I don't know if that's tracking where I see there's it's still overlapping, but I see them as slightly different in some spaces. I think in the ideal space, they're pretty overlapping. They're almost exactly overlapping Venn diagrams. And I'm seeing there's a chat here. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has any parting thoughts. Evan's got something.
No, I was just going to say, when I first started with restorative practices and I was using the Santa Rosa Center for Restorative Processes guidebook of those first 7 lessons, how to get your kids into restorative circles, as I was learning about it. But I have continued to use one piece of it. And again, I think it just speaks to how it supports the DEI work. And it's their guiding principles for every circle and where you start. And it's just speak from the heart, your truth, your perspective, your experiences, and then listen to your from your heart. Let go of your beliefs and make sure you're present in the conversation and you're listening to what others have to say. And I think if we just did more of that and we really opened it up and allowed ourselves to hear these perspectives and different ideas and circumstances that are coming forward, we're going to be better for it. And I think it's just a little piece, right? Just that first step of listening and respecting each other in that circle in that moment. You're going to learn something. And that's been my experience with most of the circles I've been a part of, that you learn something from, again, even second graders, first graders. They're going to share some things that are deep and they're powerful. And I think a lot of the kids miss it at times, or maybe they are moved by it. But I think when you're able to just talk and have an honest conversation in a place that, again, creates equity by allowing people to share, that's directly going to support the inclusion and the diversity and equity across the board. I just think of many of my students when I worked at an alternative placement, how much they would have loved to have gone through the restorative practices rather than being shipped off to an alternative placement because of what was going on for them. And if they had had that opportunity to share their perspective and have people listen, if they were able to say it, I think they would have probably stayed in public school longer. And that's kind of why I really loved this model, is because again, this work for me has been removing kids from that place, the exclusion of kids rather than the inclusion of them. So yeah, thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you all. And that you ended that perfectly on 7:30. So I will part with thanks everybody for coming. If anybody wants to talk more about restorative practices, you can email me or contact me. My email is mfife@cvsdvt.org. It's on the CVSD website. Thanks a lot to the Up for Learning folks, to Evan, to Leslie for coming, and for everybody else. And thanks for sharing everything you've all shared. I've had a wonderful time, and I hope you did too.